The smell of lilies and grief hung heavy in the air of Riverside Funeral Home, mixing with the whispered conversations of people who had come to say goodbye to my father. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap like a prayer I didn't know how to finish, watching strangers and distant relatives file past the casket of the man who had shaped every corner of my existence. Dad had been gone for 3 days, but the shock still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to stop bleeding. Heart attack at 62, sudden and merciless, taking him from us on a Tuesday morning while he was reading the newspaper and drinking the coffee I had brought him just an hour before. My brother Marcus sat 2 seats away from me, his expensive suit and practiced grief making him look like he was auditioning for the role of devoted son rather than actually living it. We hadn't spoken since the hospital, hadn't exchanged more than logistics about funeral arrangements and family notifications. 35 years of sibling rivalry had culminated in this moment, sitting side by side while feeling like strangers, united only by loss and divided by everything else. But there was one person in that room who saw through all the pretense and performance. My 8-year-old nephew Tyler, Marcus's son, who had spent more time with me in the past year than he had with his own father. Tyler, who still believed that family meant love, not competition. Tyler, who was about to teach a room full of adults what courage looked like. The war between Marcus and me had been raging for decades, but it escalated to nuclear levels when Dad got sick 18 months ago. Suddenly, the brother who had been too busy with his law practice and country club memberships to visit more than twice a year became a daily presence at Dad's bedside, armed with medical opinions and financial advice that no one had asked for. "You're enabling him," Marcus would say when he found me helping Dad with his medications or driving him to doctor's appointments. "He needs to maintain his independence, not become dependent on his unmarried daughter who has nothing better to do." Nothing better to do. As if my job as a high school teacher was just a hobby. As if my choice to stay close to home and care for our aging father was somehow less valuable than his 6-figure salary in corner office in downtown Seattle. The truth was, I had been Dad's primary caregiver since Mom died 5 years ago. I was the one who noticed when he started forgetting to take his blood pressure medication. I was the one who drove him to physical therapy after his knee surgery. I was the one who sat with him during those long nights when the loneliness felt too heavy to bear alone. But Marcus had the power of attorney, the financial control, and the ability to make Dad feel guilty about burdening me with his care. Slowly, subtly, he began positioning himself as the responsible son while painting me as the overprotective daughter who was holding Dad back from living his life. Tyler saw through it all. During his weekend visits with Dad, he would watch the dynamics with the clear-eyed observation that only children possess. He saw how his father's voice changed when he talked to me, how the warmth drained from family gatherings when Marcus started talking about Dad's situation and my involvement. "Why does Daddy talk to Aunt Jenny like she's in trouble?" Tyler asked me one Saturday while we were making pancakes in Dad's kitchen. "You're not in trouble. You're just being nice." From the mouths of babes. The funeral arrangements became another battlefield. Marcus, as the executor of Dad's will, took control of every decision with the efficiency of a general planning a military campaign. He chose the funeral home, selected the casket, wrote the obituary, and planned the service without consulting me about anything beyond what I would be wearing. "I think it's best if I handle the eulogy," he announced during one of our tense planning meetings. "I have more experience with public speaking, and I think I can capture Dad's legacy in a way that honors his memory appropriately." His legacy, as if Dad's life could be summarized in corporate buzzwords and professional achievements. As if the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me through my divorce and called me every Sunday just to hear my voice could be reduced to a resume. "What about sharing the eulogy?" I suggested. "We both have different perspectives on who Dad was." Marcus's smile was sharp as a blade. "Jenny, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but this isn't the time for emotional outbursts. People need to hear about Dad's accomplishments, his contributions to the community, his success as a businessman and father. They don't need to hear about bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts, bedtime stories and pancake breakfasts. He said it like those memories were somehow less important than Dad's quarterly earnings reports or his membership in the Rotary Club. The final insult came when I saw the program for the service. Under speakers, only Marcus's name appeared. I wasn't even listed as a family member who would be sharing memories. I had been relegated to the audience of my own father's funeral, expected to sit quietly while my brother delivered a sanitized version of Dad's life that erased everything that made him human. Tyler keeps asking if you're going to talk about Grandpa. Marcus's ex-wife Sarah mentioned when she dropped Tyler off for his final visit with Dad's body. He has some things he wants you to say if you get the chance. If I got the chance. As if speaking about my own father was a privilege that had to be earned rather than a right that came with 35 years of love. The night before the funeral, I sat in Dad's empty house, surrounded by the remnants of a life that Marcus would soon liquidate and distribute according to the cold logic of legal documents. Dad's reading chair still held the impression of his body. His coffee mug sat unwashed in the sink, a small rebellion against the finality of death. Tyler found me there, having convinced his mother to let him spend one last night in the house where his grandfather had taught him to play chess and told him stories about the old days when life moved slower and families stayed closer. "And Jenny, are you sad that Uncle Marcus won't let you talk tomorrow?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch with the directness that only children possess. "A little," I admitted. "I have a lot of things I wanted to say about Grandpa." "Like what?" So I told him about how Dad used to make shadow puppets on the wall when I was scared of thunderstorms. How he taught me to change a tire in the parking lot of a grocery store when I was 16. How he cried when I graduated from college because he was so proud that his daughter was going to be a teacher. How he called me his sunshine girl even when I was 35 years old and feeling anything but sunny. Tyler listened with the intensity of someone much older, nodding at the right moments, asking questions that showed he understood the weight of what I was sharing. "Those are the best stories about Grandpa," he said finally. "Uncle Marcus's stories are boring. They're about money and work and stuff that doesn't matter. Your stories are about love out of the mouths of babes." "Tyler, tomorrow is going to be hard," I told him. "Your dad is going to say nice things about Grandpa, but they might not sound like the Grandpa we knew." "That's not fair," Tyler said, his 8-year-old sense of justice flaring. "Everyone should know the real Grandpa." I hugged him close, breathing in the scent of childhood innocence and unwavering loyalty. "Sometimes life isn't fair, sweetheart. Then someone should make it fair," he said simply. The funeral service began with the kind of somber dignity that funeral directors perfect over decades of practice. The chapel was full. Dad had touched more lives than I realized, and seeing the faces of his former students, business colleagues, and neighbors brought a bittersweet comfort to the sharp edges of grief. Marcus delivered the opening remarks with the polished confidence of someone accustomed to commanding a room. He spoke about Dad's business acumen, his civic contributions, his role as a pillar of the community. Every word was technically true but emotionally hollow, like reading a Wikipedia entry about someone you'd never actually met. "Robert Morrison was a man of achievement," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the chapel with practiced authority. "He built a successful business from nothing, provided for his family, and left a legacy of professional excellence that will inspire future generations." I watched the faces in the audience as Marcus spoke. Some nodded politely, but I could see the confusion in the eyes of people who had known Dad as more than a collection of professional accomplishments. Mrs. Henderson, who lived next door, looked puzzled when Marcus described Dad as focused on success above all else. Coach Williams, who had worked with Dad on the Little League board for 15 years, seemed surprised to hear Dad characterized as someone who prioritized efficiency and results. Tyler sat beside me, his small hands clenched in his lap, his face growing more troubled with each sanitized anecdote. This wasn't the grandfather he knew, the man who had taught him that kindness mattered more than winning, that family came before everything else. Dad was particularly proud of his business legacy, Marcus continued, warming to his theme. He often said that success was the best measure of a man's worth, and by that standard, he was truly successful, That was when I saw Tyler's face change. Dad had never said anything like that. In fact, he had often told Tyler the opposite, that success without kindness was just selfishness dressed up in expensive clothes. Marcus was rewriting Dad's values in real time, creating a version of our father that served his own narrative about what mattered in life. And he was doing it in front of people who had loved the real Dad, the man who measured success by the number of people he helped, not the number of dollars he earned. Tyler looked up at me, his eyes blazing with 8-year-old indignation. "That's not true," he whispered. "Grandpa never said that." Marcus was building to his crescendo, his voice taking on the theatrical quality of someone who believed his own performance. The microphone amplified every word as he painted a picture of Dad that was technically accurate but spiritually false, a successful businessman who had prioritized achievement over everything else. "My father taught me that weakness was something to be overcome, not indulged," Marcus said, his eyes finding mine across the chapel. He believed that people who couldn't stand on their own 2 feet were simply making excuses for their failures. The words hit me like a physical blow. He was talking about me, using Dad's funeral as a platform to deliver one final insult about my choice to prioritize caregiving over career advancement. In Marcus's version of events, my devotion to Dad wasn't love, it was weakness. He had no patience for people who wallowed in emotion instead of taking action. Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with each cruel word. He would have been embarrassed by the kind of sentimentality that some people mistake for love. The chapel was silent except for the soft sound of people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't a eulogy anymore, it was a character assassination disguised as tribute. A public humiliation delivered at the moment when I was least able to defend myself. Dad believed that real love meant pushing people to be better, not enabling their dependence, Marcus said, looking directly at me now. He wouldn't have wanted to be remembered as someone who encouraged weakness in others. That's when Tyler moved. My 8-year-old nephew stood up from his seat beside me and walked toward the podium with the determined stride of someone on a mission. The chapel fell silent as this small boy approached a microphone where his father was delivering his calculated cruelty. "Tyler, sit down," Marcus said, his voice sharp with embarrassment. "This isn't appropriate." But Tyler didn't sit down. Instead, he reached up and pulled the microphone down to his level, his small hands steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do. "That's not true," Tyler said, his young voice carrying across the chapel with crystal clarity. "Grandpa wasn't like that at all." Marcus reached for the microphone, but Tyler stepped back, protecting it with his body. "Grandpa was kind," Tyler continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. "He was the kindest person I ever knew. He helped Aunt Jenny because he loved her, and she helped him because she loved him back. That's not weakness, that's what families do." The chapel was completely silent now, 200 people witnessing an 8-year-old boy defend his grandfather's memory with more courage than any of the adults had shown. "And you know what, Daddy?" Tyler said, looking directly at his father with eyes that held no fear, only disappointment. "Grandpa was kinder than you'll ever be." The words hung in the air like a judgment, delivered by the most innocent voice in the room. Marcus stood frozen at the podium, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that might have been shame. Tyler handed me the microphone and walked back to his seat, leaving the chapel in stunned silence and his father's carefully constructed narrative in ruins. I stood at that podium holding the microphone Tyler had rescued for me, looking out at a room full of people who had just witnessed an 8-year-old boy stand up to his own father in defense of truth and kindness. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady when I finally spoke. "Tyler's right," I said simply. "Dad was the kindest person I ever knew." And then I told them the real stories. About how Dad had driven 3 hours to help me move when my marriage fell apart, never once saying "I told you so." About how he had learned to braid hair when I was 7 because Mom was working double shifts and I wanted to look pretty for school pictures. About how he had called Tyler every week just to hear about his soccer games and spelling tests, because he believed that small moments mattered more than big achievements. I told them about the man who had measured success by the number of people he made smile, who had taught me that strength wasn't about never needing help, it was about being brave enough to give it. When I finished, the chapel erupted in the kind of applause that comes from recognition, not politeness. People were crying, nodding, sharing their own memories of the dad I knew, the real dad, not the corporate version Marcus had tried to sell them. Marcus left before the service ended, but Tyler stayed beside me, his small hand in mine as we said goodbye to the grandfather who had taught us both that love means standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. 6 months later, Tyler spends every weekend with me. We cook Dad's pancake recipe and tell stories about the man who believed that kindness was the only legacy that really mattered. Marcus and I still don't speak, but Tyler has learned something more valuable than any inheritance. He's learned that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Dad would have been proud of his grandson's courage. After all, he's the one who taught Tyler that real strength comes from protecting the people you love. If this story reminded you that children see truth more clearly than adults, that kindness is the only legacy that matters, subscribe and share this with someone who needs to remember that courage comes in all sizes. There are moments when only innocent hearts dare to speak truth to power, and this is one of them.